Okay, so I'll invite people, as always, to turn their cameras on. It's not required, but helps to build that sense of Sangha. And so I'll go ahead and get started then with the talk on this third of the spiritual centers and drives. And I've talked already about the belly center and the self-preservation instinct, the heart center, and the one-on-one or sexual instinct. That's really about one-on-one relationships. The head center, about the social instinct, and then the fourth center is the mode that's over the head, which is the transpersonal center that I'll be talking about next month. And just as a brief recap of the centers generally, for anybody who wasn't here and for the recording. So the centers are centers in the body. They're not the same as chakras. Although I think there's a lot of value in understanding the chakras, and the Hindu tradition, the Hindu yogic tradition knows a lot about that. I've spent a lot of time studying that myself. But this is actually different. They're considered to be deeper, a little more fundamental. And there have been people, when I've given this talk before, from the Taoist Qigong tradition, and they work a lot with energy. But my understanding of this comes mainly from the diamond approach and from the Sufi tradition. So just to be clear where I'm pointing to. And then the drives also are known as psychology. So it's a little bit of a hybrid from different traditions. Buddhism does have, especially Tibetan Buddhism, has a sense of energy centers, much more so than Theravada, and in Zen, they focus on the belly center. But I haven't heard a lot on the other centers, but I'm not as familiar with Zen. I haven't practiced in Zen. So just to orient us. What's important about this? You know, I mean, why would I be talking about it? And one of the reasons that I think it's important is that if we don't work with the centers directly, they're driving us and we're not conscious of it. And so to bring a consciousness of this and to work with the centers and the drives in particular directly is helps us to understand a lot of what may be driving our behavior. In the diamond approach, one of the founders, Hamid Ali, who goes by the pen name A.A. Chalmers, he talks about us being basically the instinctual drives, the three lower instinctual drives, covered by a thin veneer of civility. So, you know, and all we have to do is look at the news for 5 minutes to see how true that is. You know, it's kind of scary that for all these thousands of years of evolution, you know, we've come a ways, but we have a ways to go in terms of working with the drives. And the other thing is, you look at spiritual teachers who are legitimately realized, who haven't worked on these drives, who've just suppressed it into the unconscious, and they've acted out on them. I mean, financial scandals are based on the self-preservation instinct. Somebody wanting more stuff, basically, and taking it, or somehow, you know, swindling their congregation or their, you know, students in some way. The sexual drive, do I have to say anything about how that runs amok when people aren't working with it directly? The social instinct I'll get to tonight, but there can be a lot of competition in spiritual communities. That's all about the social instinct. So, you know, if we think of these as things that historically these have been thought of as things that can't be dealt with spiritually. And so most every tradition on the planet has used renunciation as the way to deal with it. And especially with monasticism, we just take it all away. You can't have any stuff. So you don't own anything. Here, we'll give you your clothes. You can have these few other things, but basically you have nothing. No sex, no one-on-one relationships. That's with your teacher. That's who your one-on-one relationship is with. So they replace, you know, what's part of, I mean, these drives, the lower drives, all mammals have. And like it or not, we're mammals. And this is how mammals survived, was by relying on these instincts to preserve yourself. I mean, even plants have that. You don't even have to be an animal to have a survival instinct. The reproduction instinct, which, you know, again, plants have that, but, you know, now you're getting into mammals, and amphibians have it, although it's not very developed. And then the social instinct, you look at the higher mammals, it's all about those social networks. So, and then the enlightenment drive, of course, not that many humans have the enlightenment drive, but if you're on the spiritual path and you're, you know, meditating regularly and things, you've got an enlightenment drive. Even if you don't say that you're about that, you know, there is something active in you that's drawing you to be curious about this and wanting it. So that's really a drive that is not active in all humans, not active in most humans, but some it is, and some it's really compelling. So if we don't work with these, the lower drives, they will block our progress because they're still running our behavior. They're powerful. These drives are extremely powerful. And to think that the enlightenment drive is somehow going to just overpower those, you know, if we're going to have a human experience, we need this thing called a body. We can't have an experience in the physical realm that we're in right now without a body. And that body has to stay alive. And babies that don't cry out for food, I mean, all the baby birds are out there right now, fledging out of the nest. The baby bird that squawks the most gets the most food. The baby bird doesn't ask for the food, it might die. So, you know, these are things, they're powerful, powerful instincts. And this is part of why we, working with them can be really helpful, just bringing them into our awareness of what's driving our behavior that we may not even notice. There is a relationship to the Enneagram. So for those of you who work with that, you don't need to know anything about the Enneagram for the drives to be beneficial for your practice. But if you do know that, there is a relationship, and it's called the subtype. So you have your main Enneatype, which is a number, and then the subtypes are actually can be quite revealing. So you can find out more about that online or in books on the Enneagram. And I recommend Rizzo and Hudson, Sandra Maitre, mainly, and others, but those would be two good places to start on the Enneagram. The enlightenment drive, for a long time, there's a sense that the lower drives and the enlightenment drive are competing. That's an either or. And I get these questions a lot about, well, like if I really go on the path, do I have to give up my family, you know, or my job? And no, you don't. I mean, look at me. I worked in the corporate world. I have clients. I had a coaching session with an executive today in between my sessions with Dharma people. So no, you don't have to give those things up, but the reconciling that is a long process. It's long and it's not easy. And this is why monasticism has been such a go-to for, you know, around the world, because these drives are hard to work with. What we have now in the last 100 years is psychology. So we understand a lot more about how the psyche actually works. And that's what we have that the Buddha didn't have, you know, and all the other traditions that just said, you know, we can't deal with these things, to just stop, you know, we'll make it where your social community, you leave the world, you come behind the monastery wall, and we're your community, we're your tribe now. You know, and that's how they did it. And that's, you know, there's still benefit to that. I'm not saying that isn't beneficial, but there are ways to work with these things as householders. And that's really the opportunity in our time, is there's so many of us now that are interested in the path and in awakening who aren't going to become monastics, that we have to figure out how to deal with these drives, because those buttons get pushed all the time. You know, we have to support ourselves. We have to earn money. We have to own a home or figure out how to pay for housing and food. And what if we're in a relationship? What if we have kids? What if, you know, we're part of communities? All these things are things householders are doing all the time. So we need to include that include that in our practice and understand unconscious drives and how compelling they are, and be able to look at them objectively without judgment, instead of just saying, well, we can't deal with it, let's just push it into the unconscious and then have it leak out, which is, unfortunately what still happens a lot when we see scandals and other, unfortunate things. So that's a general overview about the centers and the drives and why it's worth working with them. So for the other instincts, I will have the talks posted if they're not already. The belly center, the self-preservation instinct is really the core. The other drives come from that. Even the enlightenment drive comes from that in a certain way. That's really about having enough stuff to stay alive. And people who focus on that center, usually one of the things that can be helpful is to figure out which center is predominant. Usually we have it like an ordering, or sometimes it's called a stacking, like the one that we focus on the most, and then the second most and third most. Sometimes for some people, the third most they don't spend a lot of mental energy. It might even be like a little bit of a blind spot. But the self-preservation instinct is about, people who have that as their predominant focus on things a lot, on the home, on food, can be foodies, on material things. And, we need material things to stay alive. So we all focus on it to some extent, that people who have that as their top one will have that be predominant. Like sometimes people who have that as predominant either will reject the material, like reject money, try to live in a tent on the side of the road, I'm rejecting all that. Well, you're still totally wrapped up in it, or I've worked with people who have plenty of money, millions, enough to live the rest of their life, and they're still working. They're still killing themselves to work, and it's never going to be enough. It doesn't matter how much they have. So it's compulsive in over focusing on that. And then the one-on-one drive, or the sexual instinct, that is really a big focus on a lot of times on our primary relationship with a partner. So people who have this as their top drive will spend a lot of time and mental energy on their partner, if they have a partner, or might reject that. Also, people who this is the top instinctual drive, they will really prefer one-on-one relationships, like spend a lot of time, like might not want to have a party for their birthday. They might want to go out individually with each friend instead of having a party where everyone's together, because it's more fun to be one-on-one. So people who have that drive also could be a lot of emphasis on reproducing, on having kids. And, it's a natural human drive to want to have kids. There could be, again, like a lot of attention spent there relative to the other two. And so tonight I'll talk about the social instinct. And we might wonder, like, why is that in the head? Because the head is mostly thinking. And so the head center, a lot of us in the modern world are pretty much head up, neck up. We're like heads, floating heads without bodies. A lot of people aren't even in touch with their bodies, regardless if this is the top center or not. So, it's really common for a lot of us to live in our heads, to be lost in thought a lot of the time. It's one of the modern ills that I think in prior eras, people were a lot more body centered, especially when they had to, produce their own food. I mean, think of the time. My grandparents were all farmers. They spent so much time with their bodies, with the earth, growing things. They were physical a lot. So really, we're the first era with the Industrial Revolution is really the first era where people weren't really physical a lot. So a lot of us are now very head up. And then if you sit in front of a computer all day, it's even more head up, So believing our thoughts are ultimate reality, lost in thought. That quote, I think this was the beginning of this, was in the area of Descartes, the philosopher. I think, therefore I am. And that pretty much summarizes the whole thing right there, that we are our thoughts. And there's a certain way that when we believe our thoughts are ultimate reality, they become reality to us. That if we believe it, then it's true. And that's kind of what Buddhism is pointing to, is the opportunity to get some freedom from total identification with our thoughts. So then how does this relate to the social instinct? And one of the things that's really interesting biologically is that the higher the animals that have the higher thinking, for example, primates and cetaceans, which includes whales and dolphins. And I've had the opportunity to swim in the open ocean with dolphins, engaging with them, which is kind of miraculous that happened. But they're very intelligent. I mean, they have capacities we don't have for sonaring and other things. So in some ways, they're ahead of us with what they can do with their brains. But higher creatures, elephants and dogs also are in this category. So all the primates, which is what we are, again, we don't like to realize it, but we're primate. We're basically apes with less hair. Cetaceans, elephants, dogs, they're all highly social. And what they found as we've gotten more knowledgeable about the brain and neuroscience is that all those social interactions, they make your brain get bigger because it's really complicated. And so creatures that have highly complex social interactions have bigger brains, and it's part of the intelligence. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that the head center also corresponds to the social instinct. And that complexity of social interaction causes this part of actually our physical body to get bigger and more complex and more sophisticated. So the social instinct, what is that then? It's the tribe. If we associate it to animals and humans for many, many millennia, it's seeing that we're a lot safer with the tribe than without the tribe, which was really true. I mean, even now it can be true in a lot of ways, but for earlier humans, even just a few hundreds of years ago, if you got kicked out of your tribe, your chance of survival dropped dramatically. What was one of the worst punishments you could get would be to be kicked out and to have to go out there all on your own, out in the wilderness with wild animals and other tribes who'll be very happy to kill you or turn you into a slave. This isn't that long ago that these things were regular occurrences with humans all over the planet. All you have to do is, I'm very interested in wolves. And if you've watched any videos on wolf packs and the way they've studied them, this is the main punishment that a wolf gets, is to be kicked out of the pack. And a wolf by itself is much less likely to survive. So there's something in us that knows this, that knows that I don't want to be on the bad side of the tribe. And this is why, what is the number one fear of humans year after year after year? Not death. Okay, death is number two. Number one is public speaking. Now, why would that be true? Why would public speaking be the number one fear of humans? Because of this, because of the social instinct. We don't want to look stupid in front of others. We don't want to do something wrong where now we're going to be kicked out. We're going to be shunned. We're going to be shamed. We're going to be embarrassed. This is all part of the social instinct that makes us afraid of public speaking, so we can see it. It's in really practical terms. There's a truth of being safer with the group than on the bad side of the group. Some people will push against the group. So the way that they're still enmeshed with the group is to say, I'm against the group, but then they're still just as enmeshed because there's so much identity in being against the group. So either way, it's still the same instinctual drive. So, you know, if we were kicked out, that was pretty much it. And there's something deep in our DNA that wants to be okay with the group and wants to be and sees a certain safety in that. So as modern people, I mean, where can we really go? There aren't other people. It's, you know, we have to work at it a little bit for a lot of us. But you know, this is so in our attention then, what is happening? How do we see this? Well, this is like a subtle sense of where am I in the pecking order? You know, looking at rank and comparing mind. When comparing mind's going on, that is the social instinct. How do I compare to next to that person? Am I better? Am I worse? Either of those doesn't matter, better or worse, it's still the social instinct. Am I included? Am I excluded? If I say this, will people shun me? Will I look stupid? Will I be an outsider? Will I somehow get burned at the stake? You know, all these things, again, they're not that far back. Lynched. I mean, all we have to do is look at our own country and see that all these things have happened not that long ago. So this is very deep in the psyche to be constantly monitoring, okay, am I in, am I out? Where can I find some safety with others who I can be in with, that get me, that aren't gonna shun me? Or can I, you know, how can I modify who I am in my presentation so that I can look like I'm fitting in, even though inside this isn't really authentic? I'm going to modify how I look so that I can be accepted. Being accepted, or again, there's some people who like their identity is about being counter. I'm the radical, I'm the rebel rouser. But then, of course, the rebel rousers have their own group, you know. So either way, we're still part of a group that's doing that thing, even if it's pushing against like the normal society. Ruminating about what others think or societal norms. You know, if I'm deviating from the norms, how's that going to be? Will there be some negative consequence? I better fit in. So, you know, we all seek refuge in the group. It's not that this is wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's when it's driving our behavior and also our spiritual unfoldment. Because when you just being a meditator and or Buddhist, we're not in the norm in this country. You know, it's already a little bit of a, you know, outside the norm mainstream. So, you know, fortunately, there are other Buddhists, but even being a Buddhist can become an identity that now I'm a Buddhist. I better look like a good Buddhist. I better fit in as a good Buddhist. You know, in the old days, we all looked the same because all of us shaved our heads and we all wore robes and we all carried a bowl, and you couldn't even tell the men from the women. That's how much we had to fit in. So nowadays we don't have to do that, but that's still there. Churches, like when I was a kid, we moved a lot. And one of the first things my parents did was like get us to a church so we'd have a social network. That was the point. You know, it was a way to make friends. I mean, my parents did have beliefs, but, you know, it was more social than anything. And so churches, work is a big place where people have their social group. And in the old days, you know, people would stay at jobs for 30 years and it was a huge part of the safety and the identity. Now it's not so safe anymore because people get fired and there's layoffs. So that's changed a little bit where there isn't as much identity in work. Being a monastic, idealizing that as a social group who's making sacrifices. That can be a way of seeking refuge in a group. Having safety in numbers, sports teams. God, you want to see the social instinct at work? I spent a semester in England when I was a kid. People kill each other at rugby matches in the audience. They aren't even playing. They're in there, they're killing other people sitting in stands because of something somebody down in the field did, or a call that a referee made. You know, this is a lot of identity in that. Political parties, we see it now. Unfortunately, there's become a lot of identity in political parties and a lot of separation, unfortunately. Regional area, I'm from here, you know, and this is how we are in this region. We're not like that region. That region's like this, and it's, you know, maybe sometimes a little inferior to ours. Large families, even people who are part of large families and find a safety, even though maybe they're doing it out of duty and don't enjoy going to those events. There'll be a sense, I have to go because that's my tribe. So you go every year and then complain on the whole way home about how awful it was. That's the social instinct at work. So, you know, so these are all ways that it shows up, that if we aren't aware of it, it's driving our behavior and our sense of identity. And that's really what the Buddha was pointing at, is there is a deeper identity that's beyond all conditioned things. But if we're, you know, if these drives are running us unconsciously, we might keep doing things that we know aren't really congruent just because it somehow pacifies this instinctual drive. I work with people all the time who they're doing things that they are resentful about or feel incongruent or whatever, but they feel it's a social obligation. And, you know, that's inauthentic. So at some point in the path, we just can't keep being inauthentic anymore and not have it be a block to our spiritual unfoldment. So, you know, there's deeper than this. This is replicating the oneness of everything. So at the deepest level of our being, there's both emptiness and unity. And Buddhism emphasizes emptiness. The Western traditions emphasize unity, but they're really two sides of the same coin. And the social instinct is a kind of a replication of the reality that at the deepest level, everything, there is non-separation. And so it's kind of it's the ego's attempt at finding safety in that ground that really is. I'm going to do my demonstration. And two times ago, I was asked to do this and then I forgot last time. But so this is how we normally see reality, of things being separate. And, you know, maybe this is our tribe here, so we feel comfortable. But, you know, when we're in touch with our deeper nature, it's the separate individuals down here where the grounded being is. There really isn't separation. Yes, there's a truth that these fingers are separate, but the hand is so much more fundamental than the fingers. And this is really what the social instinct is trying to get some comfort from, is like finding that sense of the larger whole in social groups that we're part of, in our own internal sense of safety. So it's kind of trying to replicate our actual unity with all of being. But being part of a group is never going to have the same safety as really knowing our deeper nature, which is safe beyond any group we're in. You know, groups come and go too, and our membership and inclusion in those groups come and go too, just like everything else in the conditioned relative world. Or maybe we do get kicked out of a group. Maybe we do something and now we're not comfortable and we have to leave. It's not permanent, no matter even our families, you know, even though there's blood there. We may not always feel a safety or even a kinship with blood relatives. So that doesn't mean we can't still love them and have contact. It's more about what's going on inside us. So where we can see that we have some freedom from this drive is when there's a comfort, whether we're in or out, that we're not, our identity isn't dependent on being with the group for a sense of safety, and that we can really have some sense that everything we see, the opposite political party, groups that do things that go against our group, all of this is an emanation of the grounded being. And even though we fight for, social justice and for wrongs that are happening in the world, we can do that while knowing that at its most fundamental level, there's a oneness. And so the identity in those actions isn't leading to as much separation. To show up with our political views and doing something in the world to stand up for those or to fight oppression or that kind of thing is going to be done with a lot more solidity in ourselves and consciousness when it's not being done out of reactivity or being done compulsively out of an instinctual drive. So it always gives us more space when we're doing it with the deeper reality as our more primary understanding. So that's really the potential. With all the drives are in some way, mimicking something that is really true in our deeper nature. So how does it show up? Could be thought patterns about becoming an outsider or an insider, resentment because I did so much for the group and they didn't appreciate it. Well, then there's a duty. There's a sense of duty of having to do that to be part of the group, feeling lost without a group. So some people for whom this is a primary drive will join groups a lot, will have a lot of comfort being with groups. Even people who are very introverted sometimes will join groups a lot if there's this drive is predominant because there's just comfort. Comparing mind. Everybody has that to some extent, but seeing that, why do I need to compare? I mean, if I'm following my own inner wisdom and feel congruent with that, it doesn't matter if somebody's better than me or worse than me. I'm doing my best, I'm showing up, and I can feel satisfied with that. There's always going to be somebody better and somebody worse, always. So how does it help to be comparing? Wanting to be noticed. Oh yeah, that's another one I forgot. It's a natural human need to want to feel like we're contributing and being appreciated for that. So again, I'm not saying this isn't normal, but this is part of the social instinct. Is like I'm noticed, so then there's a clear sense I'm contributing and the group's going to accept me and want me around because I'm contributing. And really, again, when we know our deeper nature, we know our value doesn't come from our doing. We have value just by existing. So it's fine to want to be noticed. It's just, this is part of bringing consciousness to these things rather than having it just be running unconsciously. Envying others, that's another one that's kind of in the similar vein. Not addressing real issues for fear of being excluded. It's a big one, it's a hard one. Or even overuse of power as an insider, or use of, conflictual relations as an outsider. So the social instinct has a lot of power dynamics in it. So any kinds of abuses of that or overuse, underuse of it are all part of the social instinct. So, and on the cushion, we can see it in our thought patterns. So whatever's taking you off your meditation object, if that pattern is in the vein of what I'm talking about, you can see that that's the social instinct operating. And that there's probably, it might, this is where it could it's, I think, helpful for a person to know which drive is predominant. Because like I was just working with someone today that I've known for years, been working with 3 years, and the person said, now I get why I don't like parties. When I go, I just want to talk to people one-on-one the whole time. And so now the person is doing that. And it's fine to go to parties. She doesn't try to mingle around, you know? So just even things like that, there was a lot of superego about not mingling around. Well, that's because she's a one-on-one subtype. It's fine. You know, now she can go to parties and, you know, just talk to 4 people the whole night and have a good time doing that. So how to work with it then was samatha. We're basically, when we are, you know, seeing this pattern taking us off of the object, we turn away and we're deconditioning the compulsiveness of just letting that run unconsciously. And it also, in samatha, we're seeing our patterns clearly. So the samatha can really help us see if this is a big groove in our consciousness to have a lot of attention going to things relating to this instinct. In vipassana, if we see this as a pattern, one of these things I'm talking about with the social instinct, we can really explore that. You know, why is it? Why do I keep comparing myself? I'm sitting on the cushion and I'm comparing myself with others. What's that about? You know, without judging oneself, just to feel into. Almost all of these patterns were defense mechanisms we developed early in life, and they served us in some way. But do they serve us now? That's really what we're working with. And Buddhism is freeing ourselves out from the compulsiveness of the pattern. And in Vipassana, we can feel into and, you know, try to have some insight into what's going on with that. Brahmaviharas can help us build a more, you know, work with the social instinct with individuals or types of individuals, groups of individuals that are harder or that we find some patterning with, and also to build a more universal kind of love or compassion that can go across types of people and groups. And then in the transcendent, I'm just going through the 4 categories of meditation of focused attention, open monitoring, heart-based, and then transcendent practices, self-transcending. In that, we're really cultivating the unity with the non-dual awareness. We're cultivating a sense of non-separation, even where our body boundaries can even feel like they're not there. And there's more of a sense of, I'm not just confined to this body, because my consciousness really goes beyond that. And so that can have us have more of a sense of including everything and not needing to, you know, and finding more safety and security in our deeper nature rather than in any of the instinctual drives. And then off the cushion, we can also see any suffering that's related to being in or out of groups and energy spent on that. And then we can, you know, work with that as a thread that we can explore and, you know, challenge some of those unconscious behaviors. So I'll go ahead and open it up and see if there's any questions or comments.
I have a question.
Yes, Trina. Is
yes.
it Trina? Hi,
yes.
Trina. Hi.
So thank you so much for just sharing with us this wonderful topic. When you talk about the 3 centers, you know, you brought up a lot of extreme, right, opposing, like someone could be heavily like too much into the social aspect or withdrawn. Likewise with the belly, either, you know, it's like hoarding, having more stuff, and then also the opposite of that, which is like the minimalist. And so in these centers, as a practitioner, you know, because I know with the Enneagram, like sometimes, and even those other personality tests, there are people who will test and they find themselves somewhere in the middle of it, not extreme, not
right. Most of us are in the middle somewhere. Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm wondering, like, with these centers, as a practitioner, are we looking to find that middle place, or aspire towards that, or just or see like, oh, am I in the middle of this? Because, I could see the extremes of these within myself, but I also, further along in my practice, like more in, the here and now, I find myself erring towards like moderation of all these things.
Right, exactly. That's the Buddha part of the teaching, was the middle way, and not really going to extremes. So yeah, I think, on this one, each of them, I talked about what it looks like when it's more balanced. So with the social instinct, that would be more of a comfort. Yeah, it's nice to be part of a group. It's nice to be accepted and have your peeps, your like-minded people. It's a normal human tendency, but it's not there isn't a compulsion. Or if we find that we're doing things that feel incongruent, we can address it. If there's something that, like, in the family, that feels like it needs addressing, instead of just sucking it up because there's a fear of being kicked out, we can find a way to be courageous and have authentic conversations. Or, if we have to be a little outside of the norm in a group, we can find a way to tolerate the discomfort of that and do it respectfully. And sometimes there is a risk of being excluded, and that can be tolerated. We can enjoy being in groups and being part of groups and having that as part of the natural enjoyment of the human condition. But if there are times when that isn't happening, or we have to take a risk of being excluded, we can tolerate that because our security isn't so dependent on that. So that's, each of them has a place where we're not so identified with that drive. That's really what it is. And the other thing is that when your practice becomes more refined, like what you're talking about for yourself, we can still see the subtleties.
Right.
It all gets more and more subtle. Mm-hmm. And then to go, oh yeah, that's my social instinct. Or, each of them, I've talked about what it looks like in balance, like the one-on-one instinct. We don't need to go to monasticism. If a person wants to be celibate, that's totally fine. But, when that instinctual drive is in balance, we can be in relationship and do it authentically. We aren't just suppressing just to hold on. Like, I've got to hold on to that. What would I do without it? Or if we're without it, we aren't obsessed with getting it, that there can be a natural sense that, yes, this is part of the joy of being human, but this isn't my security, and my sense of well-being isn't totally dependent on it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So what I'm hearing from you is that, we're not latching on to one or the other, and there's a space where we can be equanimous, whether in community, with family, and also enjoy and delight in solitude and be in a relationship or be alone. And just, kind of, I hear what you're saying, and it's, and I see like, yes, because I experienced that where, I love community. And then there's the other side where I'm like, I really love solitude and also being alone.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, the balance, that's really, this is part of the drives in balance, is that we can have a level of equanimity with either side of the coin. Mm-hmm. And or if we're finding some kind of compulsiveness coming up, we can then work with that. I mean, I'm sure that, like, the spiritual teachers who acted on their sexual instinct with students didn't, in a lot of places they probably were equanimous, but when this came up and it was compulsive, they weren't willing to look at it and just say, talk to another teacher, and or people, like in the social instinct, it's more about power dynamics. If teachers are feeling competitive with other teachers, instead of saying, what's going on with me? You know, I'm a teacher in my own right. I don't need to compare myself with another teacher and be, you know, so this is where also, you know, there's the balance, but then if something is going into a zone that feels a little bit out of balance or compulsive, there's a willingness to, instead of having the superego come in and say, you know, don't go there. There can be enough openness to say, you know what, something's a little off here. I'm going to really explore this and use it for my own growth and development.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Trina. Any other comments or questions?
Hi, Tina. I have,
Dan.
hi there, a quick one.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, a lot of the way you're talking about the drives is towards psychological wholeness and, you know, some sort of a balance and becoming a better person, and feels very on the psychological side. And then when you talked about practice, that was sort of brief. So I'm just curious how, I mean, on a surface level, it seems clear that if you're a little more equanimous and not driven by instincts that are going to get you in trouble and generating hindrances, that seems not good for practice. But I'm just curious how you think about that.
Yeah. Well, part of what I'm pointing to is, you know, what we would do within Buddhism when we're doing any practice and we're seeing those, whatever's taking us off of our object when we're lost in thought or, you know, other things that we can get lost in where we're off of whatever our meditation object is. We're seeing the grooves in our consciousness. And in, you know, the way that I teach, as you know, is to really digest those, to not just say, okay, I'm just coming back to the breath. And I mean, yes, we do come back to our object, but when we start seeing patterns that are over and over, our top 10 hits or even our top 2 or 3 hits that we see are these you know, grooves in consciousness that are over and over and over we're seeing. This is another way to come at it. Like, say we find that we're, you know, we have a pattern of comparing, like we go on retreat and we're thinking, you know, we find ourselves going off the object, you know, comparing with other people at the retreat. What's that about? Well, one way of understanding it, I mean, it's comparing mind. That's what we would usually say in Buddhism, but it's also the social instinct. Okay, well, the insight that can be brought to that is, am I needing to be better? Am I needing to be worse? Where's the identity in it? You know, so it's another way of looking at identity and looking at for some people, it's very safe to be worse. Not so safe to be better or good. For a lot of us, like in New Zealand, they talk about the tall poppy syndrome. Which poppy is going to get cut? The tall one. So there's a whole cultural thing, I've been told, of not being the tall poppy. So, you know, this just looking like for that one groove, as somebody has a groove where they notice they're comparing a lot, knowing about the social instinct can bring another level of potentially digesting the compulsiveness of that pattern in a way that it's like, oh, I need to be worse. What's that about? You know, I'm comfortable if I'm not the tall poppy, but what if I'm actually really having a great sitting? Am I allowed to have a great sitting? Am I allowed to excel in my practice? Maybe not. Well, that's going to block awakening a lot. So, you know, this is where we can see, you know, these things have a direct relationship to our practice deepening and to awakening. Or if we're, say, again, I'll go back to the comparing, we're always finding that we think we're better. Well, what's that about? You know, maybe there's a sense of insecurity, and maybe we've always been better, but you know, am I having a realistic look at really what is happening? You know, maybe I need to get some outside feedback. So it's just looking at the patterns. We might overestimate where we are in our practice if we're comparing, and you know, so either way, there's a way it could block our unfoldment. So that's really what I'm saying, is to bring that in, and it's really relevant when we're working with the patterning. Most people, when they're meditating, a lot of their time is lost in hindrances and defilements. So this is another way to work with those that can loosen them up, so that they're not running unconsciously. Does that, it is psychological in a certain way, but like when I get to the enlightenment drive, that's also another place where that competing between the three lower drives and the enlightenment drive, we can see that we're blocking our own practice with some of our beliefs about what safety is, what the ultimate security and safety is in our deeper nature. I mean, that's really what the Buddha was pointing to, and reconciling. Ultimately, the other drives can come under the enlightenment drive. So instead of being an either or, they serve. So my social relationships are in a way somehow serving my spiritual path. My one-on-one relationships can serve that, you know, what I have and my stuff in my life that I need to survive can serve it. They don't have to be in conflict. So that's another place that isn't so much psychological, but it's more about having our path be able to deepen rather than seeing an either or between surviving as a physical being and needing. We are totally dependent on other people. Whatever you ate today, you know how many people touched that? You know, so there's a way that we can really revel in the social and how we're all doing things that support each other and so on. But it's more the psychological dependency that becomes a block in the path, where, like, what if sometimes people do, their relationship does end as a result of the spiritual path sometimes. When people ask me, is that going to happen? I say, I don't know. Doesn't have to happen. I know people who've been married for 40 years and have very, very deep practices, but it might, you know, so that's where sometimes people end up having to say, am I going to be authentic, or am I going to keep this job, this relationship, this X? And sometimes it does become an either or. So, you know, these are just ways of working with the drives so that our practice can deepen instead of being blocked in ways that we're not even aware of. And I see we're over time there, so I'll stop here. But thanks for the questions, both of you, and thank you all for being here. And may we all, I'm just going to say one more thing. A lot of people feel very unsafe in groups. I didn't mention that, but as I was thinking about, may we all, you know, may we all feel the comfort and safety of groups without feeling like we have to have the groups for our own well-being and value. So that is my wish for all of us, that we can enjoy this lovely human collective and also know that our deepest security comes from the grounded being, our deeper nature, and not from that. Okay, I'll see you all next month for the Enlightenment Drive and the Mo Center, the Transpersonal Center. Okay, be well.